Okay, so in our last lecture, we have added our title, description, keywords, and image destination in our site metadata in the Gatsby config.js file. So now let's go ahead and create our SEO component. So go ahead and create a new file in components, type seo.js with capital letters. And here we would want to import React from React. And we would also need our GraphQL so we can query that data that we have saved in our site metadata. So let's import GraphQL from Gatsby. And now let's create our constant of the component. So let's type const SEO, and this is going to be equal to a functional component, and here we would want to use those brackets. And here inside we're going to write our component. However, let's first create our query. Let's go ahead and find our GraphQL. Remember 3 underscores GraphQL. So now let's go ahead and delete that, and we would want to query our site metadata. From our site metadata, let's prettify that. At the moment we have a mistake here because, okay, let's prettify it. We want the title, we want the description. Oh yeah, don't forget to recompile your file before you go into GraphQL, because our changes have not been applied. So let's redeploy that. Gatsby develop. Okay, now that we have recompiled our Gatsby project, we're going to be able to query our site metadata. We would also want, beside the title and the description, we would want our image and our URL and our keywords as well. One quick tip about GraphQL: whenever you want to change the name of, for example, the title, we would want to get that as default title. Just type default title and what you want to query here. We're going to do the same for our description. Let's type default description to be our description. Let's create that for our image as well. Default image. And let's leave our URL and our keywords like that. So let's copy this. First, let's run it. And as you can see, we get our title as the name default title and the description as default description. So we would want to create a const of our query to be equal to GraphQL. That syntaxis. Okay, we have our query here. Okay, now in our SEO component, we're going to use the so-called static query. This is not so different like the page query that we have currently used. However, we can use that inside of our component. One thing that you should note about static queries is that we cannot use variables in our page context like we did over here. Let me check where was it. Yes, in our blog post layout we cannot use that. So we would need to use static query because we're going to use that inside of our component. In order to import that, we're going to import that from Gatsby as well. Type here on top static query, and here we can use that as a component, type static query. And our static query, let's first finish it like that. Now our static query receives two props here. The first one is our query, what we would want to query here, and we're going to provide the query that we have built on the bottom. And the second one is our render method. Now in our render method, we want to provide how we can extract the data from our query. So basically just type here brackets like that, and here we want to provide our site, and from our site we would want to get the site metadata. This is basically the same as our query over here. However, we want to create it as a JSON object so we can access our information. So we want our default title to be gotten here. We want our default description, our default image, our URL, and don't forget the commas. And we would want our keywords. Okay, now that we have finished our object here, we would want to provide arrow function after our bracket here. And after we get our information, we would want to create a constant that's going to be our SEO. And from that, we would want to get our title, which is going to be our default title. And we would want to get our description, which is our default description. And don't forget the commas. And now what we would want to provide is our image. Now currently we're using the URL, which is a dummy URL for gatsby.js.org. But whenever you deploy your project, it's going to work. However, if you want to provide the image to your website, so whenever you share that on Twitter or on Facebook, your link has that image here. We would want to use that here, so let's build it. We would want to provide our URL, and we would also want to concatenate that with our image, so default image. We would also want to return our JSX here, but currently we do not have anything. Let's just provide a div, a simple div. And here in the next lecture, we're going to build our helmet that we're going to provide. So this is it for this lecture. See you in the next one.